So one thing we're going to talk about is three different types of prototypes that you could test your idea, test your business model with. The first one being static, second one being functional, really the third one, a working prototype. Is what we're calling it, but it really could be a proof of concept, something that maybe the front end works, but the back end's not fully connected, something that's going to take a little bit more work than using some of these image-based tools. And so you can see here a couple of versions. There's Snapcat, one of the new ideas Peter's coming up with from TitletownTech here. You can chat with cats. So this is an example of a sketch. Obviously, this person is an artist, but really getting your ideas into a static prototype that you can sketch, that you can also determine and design out. What are some of the main features of the app? What are some of the value props? And then also really just going more high fidelity and being able to design out. These are all tools that you can use to talk with people, because we found that there's really 4 different conversations that happen. So when you're talking about your idea, there's what you said, there's what you thought you said, there's what they heard, and there's what they thought they heard. So every time we have a conversation with a person, we're creating a mental model in our head around, is this something familiar? Can I latch it to experience that I have or an existing application that I have? So all of these tools help us to kind of push that forward and make sure we're speaking the same language about the idea or the value prop. And then here's an example of a functional prototype, something that we'll talk a little bit more about, but you can see it's real. It feels real. If you had this on a phone, you'd be able to get this in front of a user, be able to, they would be able to interact. You'd be able to observe their behavior with it and how they would interact. You could also ask them questions about the types of messaging, understand where are the gaps, and really pick this apart. Might be known a little bit more as usability testing or some user research around what language you're actually using.
So what I would add here is, a lot of times when you're talking with people who care about you and would be the perfect customer, they won't give you feedback because they're talking to you, the person, and their friend or their niece or nephew or whomever. What this allows you to do, what a prototype allows you to do, especially a functional prototype, is you can ask very specific questions about the prototype that's in front of you. And then when they're answering, they're not answering to you. I mean, they're answering to you, but they're talking about the prototype. Do you like the way that when you click on that menu, it pops open? Or do you prefer it like this, where it slides open? Because here, and you can start with really low risk questions, and then you can get into high risk ones. Would you actually pay $16 to come and do this? Like, it's a great way where they're not really answering you, they're answering the prototype because you've put it in front of them. It's like you're sacrificing the prototype, which is a lot of work for you, but it's much easier to sacrifice that prototype than 6 months of building. It's a lot easier. And frankly, it's a lot easier for you to hear. Like running down and hearing that your baby is ugly after you have been coding this thing nights and weekends forever, you don't want to hear it. Like your first jump is, oh man, that person is wrong. But if you can spin something together in a couple of days, maybe a week, or maybe a dedicated weekend, and you can start all of a sudden hearing that didn't work, you're, oh yeah, well, I think I can, what do you think about this? Or can I come back next week and I can show you something else? It's a much lower risk proposition. And often if you've got the right person, they get excited about it. They're like, wow, did you make this? That's what I hear all the time. Wow, did you make this? Like, yeah, I did. And here's why I'm making it. And you can tell that story, and you can just lean on the prototype to handle the hard and the complex conversations, because they'll look at it and you're both looking at the same thing. So that's, to me, the value of the functional prototype.
And then one that we mentioned as a type of prototype would be a working one. We have an example of that. We're not going to demo any software for you here, but something that you would build the front end for that you could potentially sell. And so as we talk about the Goldilocks zone of prototypes, it's something that you could get in front of people, that you could sell, that you could then manually do some of the business functions, the admin functions behind the scenes, but would be a working prototype that would be dynamic. It would bring personalized content to that user. There'd be some sort of login or access that they could have.
And for the record, everything that you're seeing in this presentation, so Andrew and I have either built or borrowed some of these things. We're going to go through all the tools that we built them with, so you'll be able to see and kind of walk away with 3 or 4 tools that have been used.
And so before we talk about this a little bit, I want to tell a story that I heard from Connor Neal. And he tells a story about a pottery class where the professor took half the class and said, hey, your grade is going to be totally based on weight of the pots that you create this semester. And here's the scale, and at the end of the semester, you're gonna come and put them on the scale, and that's how you get your grade. So the highest weight, they'll get an A, and kind of so on a kind of bell scale. They took the other half of the class and said, you're going to be graded on solely your finest piece of pottery. And the first team, they went away. Day one, they had their hands on pots. They were creating 5, 6, 7 pots a day and experimenting, trying weird and different things, getting feedback from the pots. The second group, on the other hand, they read a lot. They read about the philosophy of pots. They visited different galleries and things like that. And at the end, it's no surprise that the first team, or the first group of people, were the ones that created the finest pottery. Is the ones that were able to go through the cycle, go through the feedback loop, learn over and over again. And I think your business and your prototype is a lot like that, where you need to get used to being uncomfortable, get used to moving fast and testing things, rather than waiting for you to build the perfect product and really believe that if you build it, they will come. Because there's a lot of studies out there that show that's not really the case. So as we think about prototypes, what we want to talk about is how long and what's the time investment to create them, and what's the realness factor? How real does it feel to somebody that you're trying to sell to? How real does it feel to somebody you're having a conversation with? And so trying to get to real enough to test, and here you can see the realness to launch would be you're ready to deploy it, you're ready to sell it, commercialize it, that sort of thing. And so this is what's referred to by Jake Knapp as the Goldilocks zone, where we're trying to get just right. We're trying to not spend enough time or too much time waiting till we get feedback, and really try to prioritize that earlier than later. And so if we build a real product, you can see it takes us a while to get to that realness factor where we can have a conversation where somebody can go through, we can talk about the value prop, and it's really going to take a long time to learn. If we use functional prototypes, we can get to real enough to test, as Peter said, in weeks and days, not months. And so really it's about trying to learn and trying to figure out how do we suspend disbelief in people that this really exists. And it's not about lying, it's not about smoke and mirrors, it's about kind of helping them understand that this will be a thing in the future. And is this something you're looking for? Does this solve your problem? And you can test kind of willingness to pay and a few other factors based on this.
So I want to talk a little bit for our corporate folks. So there's something that is inherently going to be a challenge in the corporate world, which is, so I'll use my personal example. So when you start to really hit home on an idea that you can prototype, whether it's a mobile app or a web app or some other thing, like some other tool, if you have an effective means of prototyping, you can sometimes get that prototype done within 2 weeks. At least your first cut. First cut, I'm ready to show this to my manager, my boss, my peer. When you actually go and start like coding those things, start building, your authorization process of figuring out how you're going to create accounts is going to take 4 weeks. So if you think about it, as soon as you actually have a team on board and they're all ready for you to go, they're not even going to see an output from your developers that you have working on this for probably 4 weeks. Like you're not even going to be able to show it to them. It's going to be a bunch of code, right? And it can get frustrating for you. It's super frustrating when someone is shelling the cash out and has already seen it. So the one thing that's important is there are some tools, and we don't have any of them listed, but I can walk you through some of them. There are some tools that will literally, they are ugly. Like they prototype and they look ugly. And the reason that they do that is because it makes it easier for you to sell in your corporate that like you haven't figured it all out yet. It's not, oh yeah, we got to plug it in the back end. Like, don't say that. That's not true. It's going to be a challenge. So how the tools that you pick and the level of completeness that you need, that is going to be something that's an important balance. It also depends on what type of company you're in. So like B2B versus B2C. Sometimes a B2C is a little bit easier to have a fancier prototype and you can guide people through like user interviews. B2B, it can be tough because you get big companies in there. I'll say they're in the logistics industry and it's like, when can I start moving freight? I'm in. Like it's, boom, you get my lanes. Well, we're not ready. We haven't set up any sort of EDI connection or anything. Well, you mean you got to go through and then you got to answer all these questions about stuff you haven't figured out yet. So just be aware that this is a great boon. And as they said in the best Spider-Man movie, with great power comes great responsibility. So remember that one, because this is something that I would say in the corporate world, for me personally, I realized that the hard way. Like, yeah, we still have a long road and I just sold it to see if people wanted it. And now the worst thing happened. They said, do it. Right? It's the worst thing. So it's like, oh, it's the best and worst thing. So that was my main risk here for our corporate friends as they work through this, that sometimes being too real is too good.